Good morning. So I wanted to talk a bit about the interview coming up with Nayaswami Asha because Asha has been a mentor of mine for many years. And she's a friend as well, but I really admire her points of view. She's been a spiritual director of Ananda Worldwide for decades. She's an author many times over. She was the right hand to Swami Ji, who was a direct disciple of the Paramhansa Yogananda. And she just has an incredible point of view about life, love, living, God, everything. But the reason I wanted to do this introduction to her interview is because we started on a conversation, just chatting about something, which turned into this really rich, incredible conversation about relationships and the state of partnering on the planet at this time in history. So you're going to jump right into that conversation. I wanted you guys to have that, and then the actual interview will follow that conversation. So I hope you enjoy it. And Asha, by the way, her website is ashajoy.org. You're going to want to check her out. She's really someone special. Not that we all aren't special, but some of us just are at a little bit higher level. We've done a little bit more work than the rest, and I think you'll find her views very helpful. Okay? All right, enjoy.
We're in an enormous transition period between the materialistic age of Kali Yuga and the rising age of energy, Dwapara Yuga. This is the Indian way of describing it. You don't have to have any context. You just have to have eyes to see and ears to hear, to see that everything is changing, and everything is changing so fast that whereas for most of the generations before us, there was a certain reliability about just even fundamental social systems. I mean, speaking from the last 100 years, it's really begun to shift. But therefore, what happens to all of us as individuals is that we are able to live so many different lifetimes in a very short span of time, because change is so accessible and change is constantly being imposed upon us. I mean, I think of small things like there was this Indian family, as it were, who ran a little shop where they developed film. And they were immigrants and they'd established themselves well. They ran a really nice business. Of course, it's totally evaporated. It's just absolutely gone because nobody uses film in a camera anymore. They all now, everything is digital. So their whole business just disappeared. I was reading about a breakthrough in artificial intelligence that would allow cancer cells to be perceived, that the computer would look at the slide sample instead of the human being looking at the slide sample. A whole nother trained profession just goes out the window. People have their life all planned, and then pretty soon it's gone. And then we also get exposed to things that we would never have been exposed to. I don't mean inoculated or infected.
Right.
We have the opportunity to travel, to consider professions that were never there, to be on the front end of something completely new that's developing. Businesses are global, travel is so simple, all of which puts an extraordinary strain on human relationships, just unprecedented strain. So it's like the karma of several generations here, in which all the normal supportive realities for human relationships and human love have basically been stripped away. They've just been completely taken off the table. And yet we haven't changed. We still have the same basic needs and the same basic desires, but it's like a high wire act. It used to be that you lived in the same town, you had the same friends, you had your generational family. And because we're talking about a primary partnership, a love partnership, it only very recently did that love partnership have to bear the burden virtually of our entire need for human intimacy. Before, it's like your husband or your wife was in the context of your mother, your father, your aunts, your uncles, your siblings, your nieces, your nephews. And so that relationship could give you what it could give you, but it didn't break because it couldn't give you everything. So an enormous amount of the problem, I think, is that we are asking of these intimate love relationships something that is very, very rare and very hard to come by, which is a level of capacity to fulfill each other's emotional needs that is very hard for any two people to do for each other. So there's about 100 strikes against us before we begin. Also, we don't have a very sacred attitude towards sexuality anymore, and that's putting it mildly. We have a very self-indulgent attitude or self-fulfillment attitude. Now, everything I say that's a limitation, it's also a plus. I'm describing these conditions, but I'm not necessarily saying that they're a step down. They just are the reality that we're working with, and we haven't really adjusted to that reality. Sexuality is easily accessible to most adults, not prostitutes, you don't have to demean yourself. It's just sexual partnerships are just part of the story. So that was a huge incentive to hold relationships together. I have a very realistic attitude about the importance of sexuality in intimate relationships, and that used to be a unique feature that would also hold people together. That is also, it's still, of course, part of the story, but conditions under which sexual fulfillment is possible are, again, all the walls are down, and so everybody can go everywhere. Plus, on the other side of it, our whole society is so sexualized that the understanding of the balanced role of sexuality in adult relationships, it's very confused. It's exceedingly distorted. And sexuality comes in very early, before people even know each other. Then they get to know each other, and there's this sense of great exposure and intimacy, but you're really still working with a stranger because it takes a long time. Again, all of these things are enormous impersonal challenges that we're all having to work with. And nonetheless, even from a spiritual point of view, especially from a spiritual point of view, we must learn to be unselfish. That's what spirituality is that we are able to be generous with our own needs in order to help other people grow in the way that they need to grow. I don't mean that we should be inappropriately generous, but we need to learn how to love. And love is more about giving in a balanced way than it is about keeping score and making sure I'm getting what I want. And we tend to be very afraid of those lessons. So we're made in such a way that we desire partnership, we desire children, and all of those things force us to expand our sense of the possible. And when everything goes right, which is not always by any means, we get to grow. So it's still required, but we have to catch up to the realities of what we're dealing with. And I mean, we have to add also the fact that women are not dependent on men. When we're dealing with heterosexual relationships, women are not dependent on men. And therefore, everybody has to step up to the plate in ways that we really don't know. And nobody can teach us. So it's pretty much of a chaos zone right now, is what I've seen. And there's no stigma on divorce. So that's the good news, and that's the bad news. The good news about that is you don't get wrapped up in something for your whole life that is of zero benefit to you on any level. A person can simply walk away, and that's the good news. The bad news is it takes a lot more time and a lot more effort to really build a deep relationship. And when the door is always half open, many times it's just easier to walk away from it. And so we're also not compelled to grow sometimes. We grow in other ways for other reasons, but we don't have to stick it out in the way that people did before. Now, a lot of times sticking it out, as I say, was just as often bad as good. Every single thing I'm saying has two sides to it. But what I'm saying is, let's not take this personally, that we are in a maelstrom of confusion and we're a transition generations here. And these transition generations are going to have to suffer a lot until we figure it out. Swami Kriyananda said to me once, we have to raise the children completely with a completely different understanding. He says it takes several generations to straighten it out because we haven't even begun to raise the children with a deeper understanding of themselves, of their place in the world, how to work with energy, of where sex comes into it, of how to truly love. We're just teaching children to get high test scores and get high paying jobs. I mean, how much energy, think about it. We give just zero energy to really teaching young people the values that will make the difference when they become adults. I mean, this is the big joke about education, that adults realize that their happiness comes from sources that were never, ever, ever mentioned in all of their years of education. Like, this is kind of dumb. And especially, since we're having to reinvent this, we're having to re-explore, recreate, come to peace with all of these changing realities. Men and women, especially, and gay relationships are a whole nother story about which I know less, but everybody's just having to figure out, who are we? Where do we belong? And that's the good news. Because it's all about personal growth and all about personal responsibility. It's all about self-understanding. It's not about just getting our comfortable niche and settling down into it, and you have to behave this way and I behave this way. We're not necessarily happy, but at least we're not broken and afraid. But that's not necessarily a good life. It's just a life in which there's no change. So having said all of that, we just have to start over. We have to start over. What am I looking for? What do I need? Where does it fit? And in this particular age, I think we have to be satisfied with realizing we're not going to, much of what we want out of life is not going to come because it's just like that. So we have to learn whatever it is that God is trying to teach us with what the circumstances. There's the fundamental problem, and I'll skip right to the end, is that we don't see ourselves as part of a greater reality. And we don't understand that our lives are really being guided from superconscious divinity. And the balance, that balancing line between what I think I need, how I focus my mind to achieve it, and surrender to the fact that there are forces acting on my life from a higher plane that I might not even understand. So everything that comes to me is for my own greater good. How do I really apply that, to friendship, to love relationships? All I've done is outline the problems, of course. I haven't said anything about solutions, but that's a whole big other story. But whenever somebody comes and talks to me about struggles they have in relationships, I say, well, welcome to this plane at this time. I think it'll get better, but I don't know if it'll get better. Better meaning, well, it's so confusing to me. I know so many single people who are so longing for a loving relationship. And it seems like they could match themselves up more easily. Yeah, you would just think they could, but they don't. It doesn't seem to be in the cards for it to happen. Not that it won't happen, but that it's not as clear cut as it has been in other times, where your parents would arrange what would much of the time be a wonderful life for you, but then you'd live that life in the context of your whole family.
Right.
So what you needed from your partner was very different.
Yeah.
It's the best I could say.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I mean, all that actually makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, yeah, I can see all those pieces fitting together in the greater landscape. Is it easier when we're younger, or we're just less aware, and so we rush into things? Or is it really just the state of where life is right now? But
I think,
a lot of people say that to me. Why do I have to do all this inner work? It's like when I was younger, I just meet somebody and we'd get together and it would,
yeah, but then of course, are they still with that person, and how did it work?
No.
Yeah, I mean, so you can have lots of experiences. My own point of view is that the sexual drive is so powerful when you're younger. And as I've said, the walls are down. So you can have a lot more relationships that will last a while, and that usually sexual energy will hold you together for a long time. And then as you get to know each other on a deeper level, you may find great incompatibilities that were balanced, by the physical attraction. Um, I think you have people, I think in this age, and it's, as I say, it stretches over a number of generations. my One of my informal things is that everybody has a quota of misery that they just have to go through, you know? And you're going to get it one way or another. You're going to get it because you are married. You're going to get it because you're not married. You're going to because you have children, or you're going to get it because you don't have children. And you can just go down that list. But there's going to be a quota of misery that will wake you up to deeper realities and deeper powers within yourself. And for some reason, most of us don't learn unless we hurt. Hurt is a tremendous motivator. Yeah, yeah. So one way or another, that hurt comes to us. And when that hurt comes to us, it forces us to think more deeply. I think it's a terrible system. Apparently, apparently Yogananda thought it was a terrible system. He prayed, Divine Mother, why must you teach your children through suffering? If we're open-minded, most of us are willing to say that the hardest times taught us the most important lessons. And I wish I didn't have to say that. I would prefer not to have to say that, but I do. I don't like it. I'm with Yogananda. I heartily disapprove. I think when we're younger, we have no sense of time or consequences. We often have no responsibilities. We have no children. We have no mortgages, whatever. So who cares? Let's just have adventures. You get older, you recognize the pattern faster. You know where this is going. So you will stop sooner. I think that both of them have their charm.
Yeah.
Although I did recently say to a friend of mine who is the age of, if I had grandchildren, he would be a grandchild. And I said, well, I talked to him just like a peer. He's a very good friend. I said, well, at least we're not 25 anymore. He looked at me and he said, well, technically, no, I'm actually 26. He said, and I actually said, these words came out of my mouth. Oh, you poor sap, it's all in front of you. But I wouldn't trade it, everything that I've been through in my life. It's all been really wonderful. Some of the days were horrid, but it's still been wonderful. So that's a victorious life. We think a snugly happy one, comfortable, unchallenged. But in the end, I don't think that's true. Now, that doesn't preclude having a really good friend, a really close, intimate friend. And we often do have that, at least for a period of time.
Hmm.
And but everything changes so fast these days that it just people become something that they're not anymore, that they didn't used to be. That was what I've had to see at different times. The people who had that relationship, neither of them exist anymore. Too many
Hmm.
things have happened. And so those two people who are very happy together, those people aren't anywhere on the planet now because
Hmm.
their consciousness has shifted. And nobody did anything to anybody. It's just time and circumstances made everybody into someone else.
Hmm.
And it's heartbreaking.
Hmm.
But there you have it.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be you couldn't even meet anyone who didn't live in your village, that your whole
Right.
village didn't know, that everybody could vouch for, whose character you'd known since they were a baby. Now you go on the internet, you meet somebody on the other side of the world.
Right.
And then all the complexities of all of that step in. Sometimes you're deceived, sometimes you're not. Sometimes a person is exactly who they seem to be, but you've met each other over huge time and space at stages of your life where you have other commitments, and it's just very hard to fit this in. It's nobody's fault. It's just one more obstacle.
Hmm.
Can be overcome, but many obstacles to be overcome often.
Well, and you were married for a long time, and then that went the direction it went, and it wasn't easy for you, but somehow you navigated that course and probably still are in some way. And you don't, not that this, you don't have to reveal your personal details, but you seem to be in a place where that's, you're on that path and you don't desire to have a partner at this
No, I'm
point.
done. Um, I've always had a strong monastic inclination. So it is for me to find myself back as a sannyasi, and which is what I am. Uh, it's a very natural path for me. It was a natural path for me when I was in my 20s.
Hmm.
Marriage was actually stepping off of that path because of a very deep friendship that was very, very, very positive, very supportive, and made a great many things possible. Um, but I think I reached a stage in my life where I needed to be back to where I more naturally belong. And but of course, attachment and friendship and all kinds of things develop. So such a change was traumatic. But I've been on the path for a very long time. So even when I don't like God's plan, I still recognize it as God's plan.
Hmm.
And there's this very odd relationship between time and suffering and sorrow, and um, I just feel at home where I am. I don't feel, but see, I've never felt incomplete. I've never had a compelling drive, or not since my early 20s. I haven't had a compelling drive to have a partner. So I did have a partner for a very long time, but it was never like how would I put it? I never wanted it in the abstract.
Hmm.
It was very personal. It was this person at this time, but it wasn't an abstract value for me. So in that sense, I'm not very helpful because I never, I haven't wanted to have children. I haven't raised a family. I've never wanted to have a home. It's just like many of the things that people live for. I don't. I love the idea of having nothing and no one, and and I've also been part of a huge community for 50 years. So I am a sannyasi in my heart, but I'm not solitary.
Mhm. I see.
I've had the same friends for 50 years, and I
Mhm.
have many, many.
Mhm.
So that makes me again not a very good example.
Well, and I guess part of my question area right now is, I came out of the darkness, the dark ages of my life, we referred to at the beginning. And when I emerged from that, my thought was, I need to get a life. I need to move into a life. And if I don't take steps forward, that must mean something. And probably a side effect of single parenting for a long time and feeling the weight of what that is. Because my friendships, my women friendships are really rich and wonderful. And I feel supported, probably not to the degree you do in your community, but I certainly feel supported. And so, short version is I put myself back out there and I did an extraordinary amount of dating. It was ridiculous. Probably 40 people in 6 months, 7 months time. And I thought, well, this is futile. This is a waste of time. And then I came upon this person, and then the mind tells you, oh, I've arrived.
Right.
And so then when that doesn't come to pass, it's like, well, am I telling myself a story of some sort that I'm supposed to have a partnership? Am I looking for a rescue of some sort? Is partnership the right thing for me?
I don't think a partner is a rescue. I think a partner is a wonderful opportunity to have a very good friend. A partnership is nothing but friendship. And friendship is absolutely wonderful. It's a unique kind of friendship, but it's a unique kind of friendship because it has the potential to become even deeper and richer than most friendships can because of the level of sharing that you have. And I wouldn't think in any way that you're doing the wrong thing unless you get bored with it, unless it just becomes too boring or too tiresome and you'd rather spend your time doing something else. But otherwise, you learn about yourself, you learn about people, and maybe you'll get lucky. People do get lucky.
Well, if history is any predictor of the future, I would say not.
Well, there may be, but if the longing is still there, if you can really just say, I'm done, or I'm not going to lift a finger to make this happen, but if God wants it to happen, I'll accept it. You can also cease putting out active energy without in any way letting go of the hope or the desire. You can just surrender the desire, but not repudiate it. It's not, this method hasn't worked, so I'm going to just let this go and see what you bring to me, with the recognition that he may bring you nothing, And we have lots of disappointments in our lives. Lots of things that we hope to happen don't happen. We have to be prepared for that. I wish I had an answer for you. God knows if I had an answer for you, I'd be the most popular speaker on the planet at this point.
I guess I'm more looking for context and different things to work with that, put a frame over experiences that don't make sense to me.
Well, if you really want to think, and of course you know this as well as I, you could have many past lives that you're just touching in briefly. Maybe it's the last little gasp on it, or just going around the spiral staircase bumping into people. I don't feel that any effort either to find love, to give love, to be a friend, to receive friendship is ever wasted. It's all just part of just spreading the light. If one can remain even-minded enough to be able to just flow through it and just consider it fascinating. But, we're vulnerable, so it's hard to remain that impersonal about it. But I've never felt, this goes way back to when I was 19, in that time. And I just realized, what do I have to lose by loving people? I just realized I have nothing to lose by reaching out to anybody on any basis. The only thing that can happen is they might not be as interested in me as I was in them. And if I could get myself to the point where I wasn't desperately needing them, then it would just be interesting. Oh, well, we spend a night together, we spend a day together. And, there's not enough there to spend another day together, but the day wasn't wasted.
Yes, well, that's
Yeah.
a nice view.
And now I know, who knows what little bit of karma I was finishing. And it all of it teaches me to be more interested in other people than I am in I'm more interested in getting to know other people, in giving to them, than in getting for myself, which of course is what we're all trying to do. And so if this is how I practice it, it's fine. But it can be hard. It can be hard on your heart because they may be more interested in you than you are in them. And then there's a complicating disappointment there.
We've been talking about love and love relationships and the status of the world and various dimensions and what we're all dealing with. So as it pertains to loving God, we've touched on that. And in my view, the view that I currently hold, I feel like I do that, but maybe I'm not, because I feel like I'm aspiring to the highest that I can, that I'm sharing, helping people find their highest at any time, listen to higher self, and that somehow honors. Is that the same as loving God, or is there more?
I think we divide the world up into too many pieces when we start talking spiritually.
Oh, okay.
Loving God means to expand beyond our self-interest and make the welfare of everything else important to us and give our energy to it. It means allowing divine creativity to flow through us. It means being aware at all times of the presence of hope and of joy. And after that, it's like we all have very practical lives to lead. God gives us, He sets it up in such a way that most of our time is concerned with mundane things. And so to love God is to live in such a way that we are, as much as possible, an uplifting influence. And that can be, you can do that as a hermit, because the vibrations that we put out affect the overall consciousness of the planet. So one doesn't have to be an interaction, one doesn't have to produce anything, because it's really our consciousness that is what matters, the vibration of consciousness on which we live. And most of us, however, have to practice and learn and train to have a high vibration in practical ways. So how we do everything becomes our definition of, to love God is to give. That's what is, and so therefore we need to just be in a state of giving, and the state of, how can I serve? And whether we're serving a kitten or a rose bush or a friend or a stranger who needs our help, from our point of view, it's always, how can I give? So we talk about loving God, but being like on the wavelength of the divine is in some ways a better way of thinking about it. Because I'm a disciple of a line of gurus, and because I was highly trained by Swami Kriyananda, who was a personal friend for more than 40 years, I have a picture in my mind that's a very human picture of what it looks like to always be thinking, how can I help? And when I say love God, it's a bit abstract to me. But when I think, how can I help? I can not only use my common sense, but I can use the stories I know about every saint I've ever read or heard about, and the life experiences I had with Swami. He was just always thinking of how to be helpful to other people. But at the same time, he was very, very natural, just completely natural, and had his preferences for breakfast and his favorite restaurants and books he liked to read, and it's just places we would go. It was perfectly natural, but the undercurrent was not what can I get for myself, but it was always how can I help? What can I give? There's another set of teaching that I think really helps the most. In the Indian context, they talk about 8 manifestations of the divine. And it's love, peace, joy, calmness, power, wisdom, divine light, divine sound. Now, I've given long workshops on the 8 manifestations of God. But when we're talking about loving God, we're talking about being in the flow of the divine. And those 8 qualities actually really give you a very specific way to work. For example, sometimes you don't feel very happy, but you can still put out energy. You know, sometimes you don't have much energy, but at least then you can be peaceful. Sometimes things are completely frantic. There's no peace anywhere, but at least you can be calm. And so what I found with those 8 manifestations is I can always find a way to move myself closer to one of those vibrations. And love is one of them. And love comes easily to me, but not as easily as some of the others. Joy comes easier. Just pure energy comes easier. I forgot to say wisdom. Maybe I did say wisdom. Wisdom comes easier in the sense that I can remember the principles. I can't always follow them, but at least I can remember the principles that are applicable here. And when I move around those 8 manifestations, depending on the day of the week or the astrological period I'm in, or whatever it might be, I feel more in tune with the divine. And that's a form of love also.
Thank you. So I wondered if, I know you wrote a whole book about Swami Kriyananda and his life. Maybe you could tell us a bit about that, but I know you had this incredible rich relationship, and I don't know, my mentorship, discipleship with him, and he was a direct disciple of the Paramhansa Yogananda. I mean, how does one encapsulate in a few words? I mean, you can take as long as you like, but can you share some of that, or what feels like you'd like to share?
Well, I have written 2 books about him, actually. One is a whole series of vignettes of my experiences and the experiences of others. That's called Swami Kriyananda as We Have Known Him. But basically the fruit of a lifetime is the book I published a couple of years ago. It's called Light Bearer. And I knew Swamiji for 45 years. And so it's a chapter for every year. So it's a biography from a personal perspective, but it's every year of his life, how he built Ananda, how he dealt with discipleship, how he dealt with endless adversity and difficulty. And it was a totally transforming experience to write it. I met Swami when I was 22. It was 1969. It was the hippie, break apart America, Eastern influx, drugs, everything. It was the big time. I was right in the forefront. Not much of drugs. I mean, I experimented with them, but I didn't like them. I liked my brain, and I didn't like monkeying with my brain. But in 1969, he came to speak at Stanford. It was kind of like, oh, this would be fun. Let's just have the Swami come. And it was a fraternity, just sponsored him. It's completely incongruous. It was a crazy night. But I was a profound seeker. I've been a seeker since I was born, really. I always felt that there was something else going on around here. And for a while, I thought that all the adults around me knew it, and they were just holding back because I was so young. And that when I reached a certain age, my family was Jewish. I never had a bat mitzvah, but maybe, part of the bat mitzvah ceremony is that they'll whisper in your ear what the heck is really going on this planet. But it gradually dawned on me, with no small degree of alarm, that my parents and all the adults I knew were as clueless as I was. In fact, even worse, because a lot of them hadn't even raised the question as to whether or not the obvious was not the only answer. So I was living Thoreau's life of quiet desperation, is what I would call it. Even though there was no apparent reason, I functioned quite well. I had lots of friends. I was very good at school, you know. I did find when I was 19, I discovered Eastern teaching, meditation, self-realization. But I still didn't know, but so that was a little better. At that point, I realized that somebody on the planet had a clue. Well, actually, somebody who had been on the planet had a clue.
Right.
But I was still just like, I still didn't know how to live.
Mm-hmm.
And then Swami Kriyananda walked into a room, literally, where I was, and I could tell that he just knew what I wanted to know.
Mm.
And I knew that I was going to devote the rest of my life to trying to learn from him.
Mm.
And I did. I have. I mean, I consider it present tense. He died in 2013, but physical death does not create absence.
Mm.
And he was just a fascinating individual. He was utterly entertaining, extremely funny, very bright, bright in energy, bright in intelligence, widely read, a very wide ranging interest, tremendous creative ability in writing and in music, especially, but also with people. And it became, well, the word I always use for him is pole star. I mean, you could say guru, you could say disciple, and all of those words also work. But what he really was and is a pole star. He became, and it wasn't him personally, it was the consciousness that he had attuned himself to.
Mm.
And therefore the vibration of the vibration that he was. And it was the things I've been talking about, like he loved to serve.
Mm.
He was very attuned to higher realities. He acted from a conscious awareness of a huge perspective on life, that includes a reincarnation and the acting of karma and the power and the presence of God and all of these things that they were integrated into him.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't like, oh, well, must remember this, must remember that.
Yeah.
It was just, he looked at this world and he perceived the multi dimensions of it, which allowed him to live on both sides. He lived in a very elevated place, and he also, could sit down to breakfast and we just talk about coffee. I mean, it enabled him to be very tender-hearted, to be extremely sensitive to other people's realities. It allowed him to get his heart broken over and over again because he wasn't afraid.
Mm.
He wasn't afraid to just love and give and open and hope. And then when things did not work out, and I don't just mean for him personally, I mean the enterprises that we tried, other people's lives, get caught up in karma, people who he had trusted betraying him, all kinds of things like that. And he wasn't afraid of any of it.
Mm.
And that was probably the most powerful thing I learned from him.
Was that a side effect of his being with the Paramahansa Yogananda? How did that? I mean, did Swamiji become an enlightened master, and what was he exactly?
My belief, if you want to actually characterize it, is the Sanskrit word is jivan mukta. A jivan mukta is a person who has dissolved their own ego. So there is therefore no more karma can accrue.
Oh.
But there is residual karma from the past that is still playing itself out. The thing about a jivan mukta, as I understand it, and this is not my own state, so I have to understand this in theory, is that they could dissolve that karma at any point, but they let it run because it enables them to keep reincarnating. It provides the forum for reincarnation in order to help others. I believe, and Yogananda said, that Swamiji dissolved all the remaining karma in that lifetime. And if he ever returns, he would then be a fully enlightened master.
Mm.
The limits of his consciousness, I was never able to come close to. I mean, there may have been some, I don't know, as I say, lingering karma, but a Jivan Mukta is free. His consciousness was always beyond my capacity to reach the edge of it. And what happened to me over all the years I knew him was I just began to understand repeatedly how much more subtle he was than I knew, because you can only see what you are.
Mm-hmm.
I always knew, literally from the first time I met him, that his consciousness had no boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
It was my experience of him was, it was almost like that. It was like, everybody else's consciousness has edges. I'd never thought about it before, but his has no edge.
What does that mean, edges?
Well, it's like I can expand to embrace reality and understand it to a certain point. And then I just can't. I can't feel someone else's reality. I can't give myself because I'm not that big. I'm not that good. I reach my limit. Now, it's one thing to say I could, but I don't choose to because it's not appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's another to just know I can't handle that. I'm just not going to do it. So what I saw in Swami is that he drew very appropriate boundaries, but it was never because he couldn't do it. It was that it wasn't appropriate to do it, and therefore he wouldn't. Whereas I have much bigger boundaries, much bigger reality than I had when I started. But many times I just have to say, I can't do it. And I watch myself. I can't let go of certain things. I can't let go of certain disappointments or resentments, or I'm much better than I used to be. Mm-hmm. But I never saw Swami reach a limit. He was not compelled. I'm compelled. My karma compels me in lots of ways. I never saw him compelled. I had to learn that but that didn't preclude him having very deep feelings. He experienced everything that people experience. And he wasn't, as I said, he wasn't afraid. It was just part of the ocean ride, the ups and downs.
Did that keep you curious, inspired? Did it just cause you to just bond with him? What did that? It just inspired you to stay curious about ever expanding consciousness and being more peaceful. I mean,
well, if I call him the pole star, he demonstrated to me always what was possible and helped me never to be content with where I was. Not in a bad way, but in the way that realizing that, I love the fact when I first started on this path, as it was actually literally 2 days ago was my 50th anniversary from the day that I moved into the ashram, which was 2 years after I met Swami. I didn't know if it would hold my energy. Because many things, even though I was young, many things had already come and gone. And I thought, oh dear, this one might also, but never. Because it just, the subtle potential that he demonstrated over and over, and my constant realization of another different, deeper dimension. But what he created was the example. Of course, I just, adored and revered him as my teacher, but he also was the example by which everything is measured. And I always felt that someday I can be just like him if I persevere. And he always was very good at drawing the link between the distant and the present. He taught us very much how to think. One of the just most wonderful things, he taught us how to think. okay, if this is the highest principle, but this is where I'm standing, how much of that highest principle can I bring into this moment? And then I had a place to stand and a place to work from.
Mm.
He made it so practical so that you could see how you could bridge the distance.
Mm.
And he was fun. It's the only thing I could say was what I said to him once when he was close to dying. He didn't die that year, but he might have. And I wanted him to know how grateful I was, and that, as I said, it would be unspeakably selfish for me to ask you to keep living if you don't want to.
Mm.
But I said, it won't be any fun to be on this planet when you're gone. And he actually said, I know,
I,
because Yogananda passed away when Swami was quite young. And he knew exactly what I meant. It's just, he was just fun. And I miss the fact, I keep expecting him to come in the door again. And of course, death doesn't allow that. He comes into my heart all the time, but he never walks in the door. And too bad, but nothing lasts forever. I had him for decades. I shouldn't be greedy, but I am.
oh, Pulse Star, that's the book.
Polestar.
And where do we get the book?
I have a web. You can just look up Light Bearer anywhere that books are sold and get it.
Okay.
I have a personal website called Asha Joy, and if you go to that website, everything that I have is there.
You have quite a few books.
I've published 4 through Ananda, through my ashram. The one that your listeners might really, really like is called Loved and Protected, Stories of Miracles and Answered Prayers. And I have to say, that's a really good book. I love that book. Yeah. I've read it. None of the experiences are mine. I gathered them from many, many people. They're all true. They're extraordinary stories of God's intervention. And they're all relatively short and easy to read. So Loved and Protected. You can find it on the Asha Joy website.
Excellent. Yeah. Well, I need to read Light Bearer. That's a hefty work.
Oh, it's a giant book. Yeah. In fact, when I was looking around this room, I'm not in my own home right now, and I don't see a copy of it, but it's huge. And when I finally had it published in my hand, I said, "Oh, we're going to sell a lot of ebooks." I had to give up at a certain point because it was a long story and I just had to tell it. It's about 600 or 700 pages. Yeah, it's a solid book, but the chapters are easy. I tried to make it readable. It's not a heavy read. It's a long read, but it's not heavy. I write in a very conversational way.
Yes. Yes.
It was a life's work, so it just was what it was.
Well, and I remember a few years back, you had to hold up in the middle of nowhere.
I had to go into the middle of nowhere and hide from the whole world in order to write it.
But you liked that. You liked being in the middle of nowhere, hold up.
I wish I could return. I'm waiting for I need to have another project, a writing project, but yes, I would love to do it again. Yeah. I could do that life for a long time.
Yeah. So thank you for all of that, but maybe we could switch into something a little more mundane. And
okay.
And I'm real curious about your points of view about COVID and coming out of COVID, and what was that all about, or what is this all about? And I don't know, just any thoughts you have about it and how we can digest it moving forward and return to some kind of normal if we are ever going to, given the climate and the world at this point.
Well, Paramhansa Yogananda and many, many other spiritual leaders of the last 50, 60, 70 years have all spoken about major shifts on our planet. And they've spoken about wars and conflict and earth changes. I mean, this has just been common conversation among sages and prophets and saints, and apparitions of the Divine Mother way back with Fatima. When Mary came to the Fatima children, She told them many secrets that had to do with cataclysmic events. The Mother Medjugorje has said the same. Paramahansa Yogananda was very explicit, and others, I could run names, Padre Pio and others, they all talked about it. You don't have to be a prophet to see that the civilization as a whole is tremendously out of balance. And if you listen to the popular music and look at what people call art, you can see that there's so much dissonance and so little harmony. And music, especially, it reflects the consciousness and it also creates it. And it just appears. And we are also in a transition from the age of matter to the age of energy. And these transitions are not smooth. Exactly what we see around us is this rigid holding on to separateness. And, it comes out as racism and religious sectarianism and excessive nationalism. That just like, and gender roles and all of these things is fierce. We want it to be the same as it always was, and we want to draw a circle around ourselves. And then simultaneously, you have this tremendous force that's making all that impossible. Globalization and scientific understandings and cultures crossing and races and ethnicities just mixing. So we're on a collision course. And Yogananda predicted, those are the ones I'm most familiar with, multiple war and economic collapse and earth change, huge earth change. Swami Kriyananda reiterated those. It's been part of my life I've always known. However, it won't be destroyed. Much will be destroyed, but civilization won't be destroyed and the planet won't be destroyed. It'll be readjusted. And the whole purpose is to bring people back to an understanding of our relationship to a greater reality, is to bring us closer to our spiritual divine selves. Yogananda said about America, we'll have much less money and be much happier. I mean, we can all feel that we're on a runaway train, but it's hard collectively to stop it. Mother Mary in Medjugorje, said, because there has been a deep response to her message, one of the predicted catastrophes has already been averted because people are learning the lesson that the catastrophe was meant to teach. Swamiji and others have said that there's too much momentum going toward conflict for it all to be averted. But our role in it, and I say our is anybody who would be listening to you, recognizes that, oh no, we can just attune ourselves to a higher, finer vibration, and then we're ahead of the wave, so to speak. And the end result, all of the masters say, is that there will be a period of conflict and great confusion, but many people will turn to higher values. And when it's over, there will be a very different world civilization at that point. Yogananda said, the world sick to death of war and violence will enter into an unprecedented period of peace and prosperity that will last for several hundred years. And here we are, we think that a life of ease and pleasure is a good life. But from the higher perspective, a good life is one in which we grow. And so we get to grow. And this pandemic seems to me just one of the plagues that have been promised, and the chaos that it has created on some politically and internationally and perhaps economically. I think it's really just the beginning. And so we will go back in the sense that probably the pandemic itself will dissipate, but we have no idea what the economic fallout of this is going to be,
Mm-hmm.
or the hatred and anger that's been stirred up because people become afraid.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what we need to do is we need to make haste to become strong in our inner relationship with divine power, because I think we're going to need that strength. We're going to need it for ourselves, and we're going to need it to be able to serve.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, Yogananda said, all of us who are standing with the light, and especially those who serve the light, will thrive during this period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Because as the shadow increases, there will be a greater call for the light.
Mm-hmm.
And many people will be called to the light and will be looking for those who can help them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm actually very optimistic, extremely positive, and very impressed with the expanding light. But shadow is created when there's a lot of light.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of, the only word I can use is evil. There's a lot of evil in the world right now. And so those of us who stand with the light have to be very, very strong in it. And COVID it's fascinating what it's done to us. I was in quite strict seclusion for a long time. My community put me in seclusion. I turned out to be an elder who had to be a little bit protected, which was quite confusing to me because I've always thought of myself as a youth who was on the front lines. And also we created some small bubbles so that we could run our temple and so on, and I was part of that. And so that those bubbles we had a doctor in charge of our community, so medical doctors have a certain, but thank God she saved us all. But I really found myself timid to sort of go back to doing a lot of things I used to do.
Mm-hmm.
And also, when a lot falls away, you discover what you really want. And so I don't think I'll ever go back to being quite as external, as active externally. I broke a lot of habits, and I'm happy with them broken.
Mm.
I think we're all just going to get to know ourselves better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think that's been the case.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you shared so much today, and this is something I know I can listen to many times to digest, as people who follow me will. Is there anything else that I missed to ask about, just in the flow of energy we have right now? Is there anything you want to share, say, ask, offer, tell?
I guess I want to go back to, I have had a tendency to be very aware of shadow. And I've really, on a very, very deep level, come to feel the power of all of those of us. And it's just, it doesn't matter where you are, how you form it, but those of us who were born to spread the light. And there are people who were born here to spread darkness and cause chaos, but there's more of us, I think. Or in the end, there's more power with us. Because darkness just eventually tears itself to bits, and then the light still remains. Mm-hmm. So I think we're going to have an opportunity to get very deep and very strong. And I'm very grateful for that.
Well, that's a very optimistic, well, it's not optimistic, but it's reassuring to know that you have that viewpoint. I take solace in that. Probably similar to how you could take solace in many of Swamiji's points of view and offerings. I'm so appreciative of your time today. ashajoy.com, all the great books and work you do. And I can't stop this interview without sharing you on Facebook, and you do wonderful offerings right now every morning. When I go on to check my Facebook page, I have a notification you're live, and it really gets my day going in a great way. How do people find you on Facebook? Because that's such a great thing. And you're talking about, what's the topic right now?
I'm talking right now about the Ananda way of life, which means how to live in the light is really what I'm talking about.
How to live in the light, right.
but I've done multiple series. I started it as an emergency thing, but it's 4 days a week for just half an hour in the morning, and it's really been if you just type in Asha Nayaswami, or Asha Joy, that's how you find it. I'm a little dumb on this because I'm very, very blessed to have people help me who understand that side of it.
Yes.
So that's why I made the website Asha Joy, because it's easy to remember and you can find everything from there. That's what I recommend.
And that's also on YouTube.
Yes.
You're on YouTube too, and people should absolutely subscribe and follow you, and then they get notified when those videos get uploaded, which is really, I really appreciate that.
I'm very
Anyhow, thank you for all the wisdom and just sharing and support and just everything you do. I'm so grateful you're out there doing you in the world in the way you do and making yourself available to me whenever I ask. I really appreciate it so much.
Well, we're a mutual admiration society.
Oh,
Because I'm very, very grateful. Because
I'm honored you would say such a thing.
we're just all in this together. Everybody does their part.